After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
Okay, so when did you find out the thing about Threads? Because this Twitter app drama, there's a lot to unpack.
Like right now, I just found out about Threads.
Exactly. So like at the time of recording, it is July 6th, 2023, 3:07 p.m. All right. I found out about this Thread business like the first thing I look at my phone. I shouldn't, but I do when I wake up and I see the thing about Threads and I'm like, okay, we've got 10 to 15 Twitter clones on the internet now. Wonderful. And at this time, I'm now learning that Twitter is threatening to sue Meta Inc. over this Twitter clone.
Yeah, that's about the extent of knowledge that I have on this right now. I guarantee, because I mean, there's obviously a million of these that are popping up. I mean, being a little facetious, but this is only like this particular lawsuit's only happening because it's from Meta and Zuckerberg. Like that's the only reason why like this particular one would get targeted.
Exactly, and I think it's just the threat of Meta's market share incompetence, in scare quotes, is why it's being threatened, and not any of the other 15 like Trump branded Twitter clones, some of which are pretty convincing. Blue Sky and Mastodon get a pass, but
I don't know if Mastodon deserves a pass on anything. That's
it does not.
That's the one that's been around for a long time, and I've noticed there's been the gradual exodus, what I'm calling, just broadly, the social media diaspora of people kind of just going to different places. And I've noticed like everyone that's going to Mastodon, because like, I mean, I follow a lot of academics, just, virtue of,
right.
my field and, my general interest. Right. And a lot of them have like, there's sort of a divide in who's going to like Blue Sky versus who's going to Mastodon. Mastodon seems to be like the 40 and over platform of choice. Seems to be, or late 30s and stuff like that. I mean, I could be wrong, but it does seem like that is more so the boomer platform. And it kind of strikes me a little bit like old school Facebook, like when it was like, just for like, colleges and stuff like that.
Right.
Where you have like these servers and like there's like just general issues of like connectivity on Mastodon and whatnot. I mean, they might resolve it, they might not, but it's
if it's been going on this long, it's not getting fixed.
Yeah, it's not like a technologically sophisticated enough platform, I think, for us to really, for it to really become a successor, unless they're like really serious. Though it is funny, I was on Tumblr today, not for like looking for a replacement platform, but I did notice on the login screen they have like a special button for sign up, like coming here from Twitter. So all of these social media sites are like capitalizing on this to whatever extent they can. And I think the void and like just there's a problem with it, right? Whereas I think like as easy it is to sort of dunk on, Twitter and like kind of all of these sites on like what they do, like they have kind of become like this important market resource for a lot of people when it comes to promotion, self-promotion, and all these other things, related to that. And none of these platforms really, they all have like their own individual like eccentricities that I think make it prohibitive for them to truly replace that role. I mean, we'll see. I mean, like Facebook used to be like kind of the king of social media, and it took like, I mean, it kind of seemed like just like an instant like off switch, like right after the 2016 election, that everyone was just like, fuck this place. And, people still have like their Facebook accounts, but like no one does anything on there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that this happened like kind of concurrently with I mean, I'd say the Reddit one happened first, but did you hear about like a lot of Reddit users are also in an exodus from the site?
Yeah, and like Reddit too is another example where it's like these sites, like in a lot of ways, they sort of carved out the old internet, right? And like Reddit is sort of like the last grasp that, right? Like when you like think about like forums and whatnot, it's the thing that ultimately replaced them, but like it's also like, kind of where you would find some of that like weird information, right? Like, if you like you're looking for some stuff about a game or some weird obscure piece of technology, like Reddit's kind of like the place to go. There's someone out there who's like talked about it in relative detail. Now the Twitter downfall, I mean, it's been kind of going on ever since Musk took over, but I mean, this rate limit thing could very well be the nail in the coffin. But yeah, the Reddit thing, and it's that it's like kind of like all of these big tech companies are kind of like just all at the same time, like making awful decisions. In both of these cases, they're tied to API on Reddit and on Twitter, but there's other things too where it's just like, I mean, on like the streaming world, right? Twitch has kind of had a few more recent issues, but again, like its rival platform is like a gambling promoting cesspool, so it's like you don't really have anywhere to go, and it's just kind of like not a good time for any of these platforms.
No, it's not, and like the one task of social media should be sharing like a simple status update. You would think any site can fulfill that obligation. And
have you had any recent status updates that you wish to share?
Yeah. So I mean, no, so I mean, I got engaged last weekend, and went well. One of the best days of my life. Blah blah blah. In the
just like undersell it, right? Just like got engaged,
Yeah, I gotta stay humble, It's just. But yeah, in the context of our discussion, right? It's like I figured, well, let me put up like the the post that it happened, and then I can't even say thank you to people saying congratulations. It's that kind of thing. It's like it was one of the dumbest days to be online. But then again, for a day like that, you kind of want to put your phone down anyway, so it was good for that. But
sure, yeah.
I think it's like, again, I asked this question a couple episodes ago of like, at what point would the platform be rendered unusable for you? And it's like, well,
literally not being able to use it is, a potential consideration.
And all because this dude Elon Musk didn't pay his Google services bill.
Oh, well, yeah, it's a mix of that. I mean, it's also actually tied directly to that choice on the API access. Because what was happening too was like one of the things that was stressing out the servers was that like, well, I don't want to pay for an API. So like, and as someone who actually uses some Twitter data, granted, it was that one, it was kind of done for like a class demonstration, and two, the other data that I use is all archived, and I don't need to worry about it going anywhere. Especially since I have it downloaded, but and backed up, triplicated and all that stuff. But there's another way you can do it, right? Instead of using API, you can just scrape the site, which takes a lot of demand on the server because of usage and whatnot. So the introducing this rate limit was a means to sort of block that, but it also just made the platform. Admittedly, I'm actually surprised. Maybe I'm a little proud of myself that I actually haven't hit my rate limit yet. I just figured, that was like inevitable. It was going to happen like the first day, but I haven't yet. So I'm a little proud of myself for that. I guess it's, leaning off the platform more and more. But yeah. It's like it's kind of insane where it's like the main objective of these sites, right, is to keep you on as long as possible, right? Often to the detriment of your life. Let's be real, but yeah, like it's it's just like him and his followers just trying to like spin it as a win. He's like, well, actually, I really wanted you to go outside and touch grass, and it's fine. Independent speak. It's like, shut the fuck up. No, you don't. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I don't know, all in all, right, it's like Twitter somehow made it through that, and as you talked about with this social media diaspora, like, people are talking about moving to Blue Sky, they are talking about maybe moving to another platform like Instagram. Thread, it just seems like, no one serious is going to move to it, but for the time being, right, I can't really think of and maybe like, you correct me if this isn't your observation, but in this, like, in the ecosystem of the kind of podcast we're in, right?
Yeah.
left-wing politics, history, all that stuff, right? Is like you kind of have to be on a platform like Twitter to actually like meaningfully interact with people who listen to your show. It's not, and maybe Reddit is the only other one, but then you would have to set up a subreddit, and then people would have to know what your show is,
right?
know?
And like, I mean, and people aren't really big on you promoting yourself on Reddit if it's not your own subreddit, so it's kind
Pretty
of
much
difficult. And I mean, and a lot. I mean, this goes back to when he first bought it, right? A lot of people argued that the main reason was to sort of disrupt a more left-wing space. And you know, I guess in some ways, mission accomplished.
right.
So yeah, I mean, I guess this is kind of all like it's not, you know, is it, you know, I guess we're just so used to like, you know, the capitalist model of, you know, fiduciary responsibilities and stuff like that, but we don't really think about the fact that like, yeah, you know, some of these people are also just willing to invest in like attacking their opposition or disrupting the opposition and whatnot. There's some resources that aren't being expended to necessarily shore up short-term profits. They're there to sort of, you know, weed out any type of political opposition that might arise.
And you especially see that in like the kinds of people who sign up for the blue check now, like dudes whose brains are still trapped in like '04 Bush era.
Yeah, at the very least. Yeah, I mean, it's like usually blue checks, you know, you're about to like run into. I mean, aside from the ones that Elon like trolled and like gave blue checks to, which was just another like petty, stupid episode, but whatever.
Right.
But the you know, like the big thing with that too is like you don't have yeah, I mean, like the blue checks, it's like generally speaking, when you see them, it's like just you're guaranteed to get some of the most reactionary responses that you can, you know, come across. Like, period. It's just it's reactionaries. It's, you know, various forms of racism, transphobia, you name it, and that's kind of, you know, you're guaranteed to get some of the worst takes you'll see all day from a blue check.
Pretty much, and like that's what's. I can't say anything conclusively because you would have to sift through so much data to say anything conclusively, but in terms of like the vibe on the platform, the vibe has consistently been getting worse. But due to factors like convenience and just like the fact that these other platforms aren't at the capacity yet, and also just familiarity, right? Like people will stay on a platform no matter how horrible it gets just because they have friends and mutuals they like, right? Sure, and that's been my incentive to stay on Twitter, and at least for the time being, like Twitter is going to be how we communicate updates and communicate with the audience for the show for the time being. But you know, the app has changed for the worse for sure.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is too is like, you know, like the problem too is like these sites aren't at capacity yet, but like slowly this site is also dwindling on its capacity,
right?
Where it's just like there's a lot of people who are just gone, and like because like when I go on like my feed, it's like why do I like only see from like the same few people, and it's like, oh yeah, because like all these other people are just like leaving or they're posting less and stuff like that. So it's just generally kind of a disaster, and there's not really any obvious exit point yet. I'm sure that will materialize soon enough. This kind of, I mean, when this became sort of like the place to be social media wise, that was kind of organic.
Right.
I'm not really sure what inspired it. Like, I think it was really just like kind of like the downfall of Facebook. Was the main driver. I mean, this obviously existed before that, but it was a very different place prior to like, you know, sort of the Facebook abandonment, like the post 2016 environment.
Yeah, one thing I will say, Twitter had the dopamine addiction system down pat. And Musk, you know, took a perfect system and just thought he was doing something brilliant. That's my final take on this.
Yeah, I think that's
so fair. I guess, you know, where is the next place to go? If not the internet, I think we should all start podcasting in public. I think we should, you know, just grab yourself a little soapbox and then get 3 other guys and just talk about dumb shit in public and have people watch. I think that's the future.
There we go. Yeah, you know, let's let's find ourselves a venue and let's have at it.
Exactly. First live show. We're doing it,
Yeah.
folks. Oh god.
No date confirmed. No venue confirmed.
No date, no
the event
venue.
itself not confirmed, but you know it'll happen or it won't.
Price is also not confirmed. Wait and see, folks.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Well, in addition to needing to, you know, the joys of summer, if not, you know, being grounded in outdoor activities, the sheer amount of sunlight and like, you know, getting to see people out and about for the first time in a while, is also just, you know, one of our favorite times of the year. And by favorite times, I mean not really at all, because we are just coming out of another Supreme Court term while living through like something of like an impact of the last term. I mean, like, it wasn't the clean air ruling, like pretty much like, I mean, we talked about this last year, right? Where they basically said, fuck clean air.
It feels like it wasn't last year. It feels like it was sooner, but yeah, I mean, it was last year. I mean, this is the second term with the 6-3 conservative majority, and like, man, these folks have not, you know, all the idea that like the court would be like strategic and sort of, you know, weighting concerns about its ideological influences, I think are pretty much aether at this point. If you're arguing that still, I think you're either foolishly ignorant or you're like deliberately trying to obscure reality at this point.
100%. I think again, this neutrality of the court argument or neutrality of institutions argument that we talk about on this show time in and time out has been proven to be fraudulent. So the titular,
I am talking, you know, even beyond that, like the sort of notion that they're more so strategic actors in the sense that they won't go like totally crazy in order to like save face a little bit. But I don't think we're seeing any evidence of that either.
And again, every time people bring that up too, I kind of wonder, okay, what instance is that? Because Bush v. Gore is like, you know, one of those instances where they clearly didn't do that. And
I mean, well, the strategic element with that was sort of saying like never again, and you know, that was, you know, yeah.
Oh gosh. So and keep in mind, we're already like we've already had a round of Supreme Court controversy already, right? Everything we talked about with Clarence Thomas earlier this year.
Yeah, and then there was stuff with Alito that came out that we didn't really. That was later, and we didn't really talk about it in the last episode or anything. But you know, the stuff with like basically kind of like the same deal, right? In his case, he was maybe a little bit more directly defensive about it, right? Where he put out this like literally when the op-ed came out, or not the op-ed, the editor, the piece that came out reporting like his connections with like particularly like this fishing trip that was paid for and whatnot from the person. He put out an op-ed at the exact same time, which again, like he has that media savviness because of course he's like, you know, almost certainly the person who leaked the Dobbs decision for strategic purposes of locking the justices in place and stuff like that. He's done it before, and we know that it's not like conspiracy theories. Like that one is, you know, still sort of like hypothetical. Like we know for sure he has, in fact, you know, leaked things to the press. He has connections, he knows things, and that's why he put out his editorial at the same time, where it's sort of like just ridiculous like defensiveness, where he's like, oh well, you know, I was served a quaint home style meal, that the $100,000 seat that I had on that private jet that would have been empty otherwise. I'm not sure that'll fly if you decide to like, you know, sneak in on a flight and just not pay for your ticket. You know, I don't think that would fly, literally. But you know, who knows? You know, maybe give it a try if you're feeling brave. But yeah, I mean, it's like kind of, as I said, it's just like it's this kind of silly, just blatant disregard for ethics and whatnot that we're seeing from the court. And you know, I'm not like a pro-corruption guy, obviously. No one is, but I've always kind of dismissed like the fixation on corruption as kind of like sort of obscuring broader systemic problems. like focusing on like, sort of kind of like picking like, the weeds out of the grass and stuff like that, like, or an individual weed out of it. And that being said, with like the Supreme Court, it is very much like just like kind of like so flagrant in a lot of its abuses now. And, I would giving it, this ethical code really fix things? Probably not, but I'm also totally in favor of making the judges' lives more difficult in any tangible way. I mean, that's maybe like more petty than it is like actually substantively solving something, but pettiness is kind of all we've got at this point.
I think that's a fair observation, right? And especially like the point on corruption, I think is key, because that word gets tossed around a lot in political discourse with very little clarification on what that entails, right? But I think, going back to our thesis on American civic religion, poisoning political discourse in America, right? There is this subtext that a lot of people argue about. Correctly, I would say that the Supreme Court is probably one of the most unaccountable and undemocratic institutions we have in this country. It's not accountable to the citizenry in any real direct way, right?
Yeah.
So the defense that's always offered for it is, well, the 9 justices are of, very, very good character. They have to be sworn in by the Senate, which again is its own form of a rogues gallery.
Yeah, I mean, we've got it's the democratic input here, right? It's like, well, we kind of elect the president, except when they lose the popular vote, and then like we kind of elect the Senate, but the Senate also has a lot of really anti-democratic features to it,
right?
Both like as an institution and to an extent how the members themselves are and that body is actually made up is a little anti-democratic too. So it's like the two,
and how they're encouraged to behave on top of that.
Yeah, so it's like the two least democratic institutions in our elected bodies are the ones that are sort of the distillery to like for the whatever semblance of democracy is involved with these Supreme Court justices. So yeah, like they're inherently incredibly anti-democratic. And like the fact that like there's minimal like accountability for even just like their personal issues, right? Like their personal like corruptions, like accepting money and stuff like that, and and like tangibly, right? I mean, you've seen we there's clear evidence that like these judges consistently rule in favor of these so-called friends or benefactors, whatever you want to call them. And maybe that you could argue is like independent of them actually receiving that money or whatnot. They would have just voted that way anyways. At the same time, I don't think they should be rewarded for like having like these like flagrantly like pro-capitalist approaches to all of their decision making and whatnot, right? I mean, it's always at the expense of the other 99% of Americans.
100%, and like again, like. There's a lot of what I can only describe as like legal and political fiction about the behaviors and the decision-making processes of particularly the right wing of the court, right? So whether it's like originalism or like, this kind of like reverence for like founders' intent and all that, right? I mean, I'm not convinced for a minute that every member of the court knows that like, this is all kind of a game. It's really like power that enforces all of this, right? So this idea that like, they act out of respect for the country's founders and their intent, or this idea that, they do this on behalf of the layman, or that, they do it out of some kind of moral character it's always been a farce, right? And then judicial activism has always been dismissed as like the dark inverse of this noble view of textual originalism, right? But that's the only time where the court even accepts it has a responsibility to do something good, if at all.
Right, yeah. And I think that the other kind of issue, like I think some of that civic religion that we're sort of combating, right? And we're obviously going to get into the more specifics of this term, but there's the more liberal, and I don't just mean like liberal in the sense of like just actual liberal, but like the kind of left wing aversion to sort of like totally dismissing the court based on kind of like, well, historically it did good things. And that's kind of really trapped in the veneer of the Warren court in like the
Exactly.
50s and 60s. And like that era is so far removed. And, with the 6-3 majority standing as it is, the fact that, a good chunk of it is young enough that they're going to be there for, the next 50 years. The other two people are just probably waiting for, a Republican president to be sworn in to retire, just to, guarantee that their seats remain. Though I could see an argument for like Alito just sticking around to ride the gravy train as long as possible. We'll see.
So with all this being said, I guess have they finished their term, or are there still a couple more?
I believe it's done. Let me check. Yeah. Oh God, this I found a column from the Supreme Court term contained some surprising gifts for Democrats on the LA Times. Really, there's only one that we'll kind of get into, and I don't see it so much as a gift as like just sort of like they've maintained some semblance of sanity, which is they struck down, rejected the independent state legislator theory, which was one of these proposed legal mechanisms. This was basically the idea that like the state legislature could kind of have like almost complete influence over elections in the state, even free from their own state judiciary systems. And this was kind of used as one of those mechanisms to try to assist the more legal coup elements of Trump's efforts to remain in office. And yeah, I mean, this was, as I said, like I think this is kind of one of those things where it should have been a no-brainer to strike down. That it was, I don't think was overly shocking. Maybe like, I mean, maybe a little bit from this court, but I'm not too surprised that it was struck down as it is. But this is pretty much like, I think the one time that we really got any favors from the Supreme Court this term.
Right, and the article you shared in relation to this is a good one. I'm going to plug it in the show notes, right? One of the people interviewed, I think this was an NYU law professor, Richard Pildes. This is UCLA Professor Richard Hazen. I like what he had to say about this, right? Where they've preserved for themselves the right to be the ultimate arbiter of whether state courts have gone too far. Quote, the decision harkens back to Bush v. Gore in the 2000 election, when Chief Justice Rehnquist and 2 other conservative justices took the view that the Florida State Court went too far when it ordered a partial recounts of votes. So that's the kind of read I have of this, right? Where it's like, okay, it looks like it's a stabilizing move taken by the institution, especially after Trump did all that. But the subtext of 2001, Bush v. Gore, is one of those things that's been so memory hold that I think people have forgotten that happened.
Yeah, I think people have, because I mean, like you don't really see, and I think a lot of it was just kind of maybe just the fact that Trump got in through even less, like kind of through like the same sort of like ridiculous means that Bush did, through like just kind of the pure electoral college nature of it. And I think that was, I mean, granted it was less narrow where like you didn't have like a really vital state like Florida determining that outcome, but I think that the Trump era sort of washed away a lot of the stuff from the Bush era, right? I mean, like that's why we sort of have like this, obviously this is why we have the sort of revitalization of the Bush presidency, but also even like something like Bush v. Gore, which is incredibly another incredibly anti-democratic a decision made by the court, a real indictment on our judicial system as a whole. And I think people kind of forget about it. And to an extent, right, you're talking about like it's like the stabilizing act, right? I mean, that is sort of the stable thing, right? I mean, when the justices had, granted, the only person who remains on the court from that time is Thomas. Everyone else has been appointed either by, Bush, who, won Bush v. Gore, or Obama or Trump. Or I guess, and Biden in the case of Ketanji Brown Jackson. But that's in some, they intended for that not to be a precedent. This was like a one-time thing. But I think that the court probably views it as like, we can just totally just take that as an opportunity to set a legal precedent in the future if we so desire. And I think that's kind of, what's sort of being argued here, right? That it sort of leaves the door open, right? They can, the court still has the power to sort of, here they didn't necessarily weigh in on anything, but that's because they want to preserve their own power, even if it is at the expense of maybe the larger conservative project in this country.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, like they didn't really decide what the standard is for determining when a federal court can tell a state court it went too far.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, just the implications of this ruling. Like, I'm starting to consider this, right? Because yes, there is a federal election commission, but elections themselves are run, operated, and monitored by state agencies and local agencies in this country, I think. Yeah, pretty much every state operates on that principle, right?
Yeah. So
it's like, I don't know. I don't want to get too paranoid with it, right? But it's like you could have hanging chads happen every election cycle, pretty much, if they wanted it to happen. I don't think the court's going to act that often enough. But
no, I mean, well, and like this is a territory where the court has been anemic for anything that like matters, right? Like this is, and vicious when they have the opportunity to be, right? In the sense, like, I mean, the FEC, think about like all of the election laws that have been gutted by the Roberts Court, right? I mean, Citizen
like
United,
exactly, yeah,
all of this stuff, right? But like when it comes to like redistricting, right, they've continuously sort of punted the ball on it, right? Where like, they typically have this perspective that like they shouldn't be involved in the political process, which is ludicrous. I mean, that's literally being high on your own supply. But yeah, I mean, as I said, like, I think that what you're like they've historically, especially with this court, I mean, and a less conservative iteration of this court has consistently been anti-electoral laws.
Yeah, I think that read is spot on. I think, like, to basically sum that up, right, is I am very suspect of the court's involvement in elections, and I'm also suspect of what it says when it tries to downplay that role, right? Because the one thing you can say about Bush v. Gore is it did happen.
Mm-hmm.
And, regardless of how much everyone forgets about it, right? Like, if you want to talk about how you do a coup in the United States, that is how you do it, Get the most unaccountable body to say, actually, it's this guy. Here's our opinions, like, but to that end, it's like, I don't know. I think leaving it vague like this only serves to muddy the waters.
For sure. I mean, and the court, they'll leave things vague to like leave themselves room in the future, right? I mean, maybe that's a more cynical take, but I mean, that's really, I think, what they've done, right? Is it's
pretty much.
In this case, they've sort of, maintained a more desirable norm, but that doesn't mean they will decide the same way in the future.
Yep. Oh boy. Yeah, I think I'm really not sure what else to make from that, but the implications for electoral integrity need to be examined for sure.
For sure, yeah.
All right, we want to move on to our next case
Yeah,
review.
yeah. So the next one, this one did not. It got a little bit of coverage early, but I think as like more and more decisions came out, it sort of was forgotten about. In the case of Arizona versus the Navajo Nation, we had a slightly tighter 5-4 decision that kind of screwed over the Navajo Nation Indian Reserve. Basically, the U.S. has a treaty with them that I can't remember the exact language, like legal language, in terms of like basically kind of like guaranteeing on some level water access. And what this decision does is sort of says that it doesn't necessarily require that we take affirmative steps for that. So basically, like I don't know the specifics of this case, right? But like let's say if it was something essentially like they have less water in like their well springs or whatever. We're the idea is we can't like take water from them, but if they're low on water, we don't necessarily have to provide them with it. And it's just kind of, I mean, the court has like kind of this long history of like pretty much never taking the side of indigenous people. So like I'm not too shocked by this outcome. It's just like one of those like things where it's just like, oh yeah, of course, kind of decisions that sort of came up.
Yeah, I mean, it's just shitty to read about, right? But it should not come as a surprise to anybody that the United States once again does not honor or respect a treaty, right? But
Yeah.
I think one thing that came as a surprise a couple years ago, and I think people got a little too optimistic about when they were reading that, right? Was remember when there was like I think it was Oklahoma versus the Cherokee? I think it was one of those cases, I think, right?
Yeah.
Where basically Kavanaugh and others argued that actually, yeah, segments of this land can be given back and are back under tribal jurisdiction, which is again is cool, but it begs the question, right? Like, why are all the conservative justices on board with this? And I was wondering when the other shoe would drop because I was never sold on the idea of Brett Kavanaugh defending indigenous sovereignty. That's just me.
Sure, yeah.
Right? But I think like here it is. Here's the other shoe, which is, yeah, you can have your land. Good luck maintaining it.
This is a Kavanaugh decision.
Right.
Like he wrote the opinion, like
pretty much. And I think like this is also just again like it should not remain understated that Roberts has kind of been like even if he doesn't take the hard stance, he's basically curated a consistently anti-environmental line from like
he takes and like that's like kind of his general style, like his general jurisprudential style is to sort of take the more diplomatic stance, right? Like his objection to Dobbs was that he was totally fine with upholding that abortion ban, but figured that maybe they should wait a little bit before they strike down Roe v. Wade. Essentially, that was his objection, and like that's, and obviously, yeah, like environmentally, he's maybe like the mask is a little bit more off in that case. The conservative justice dissenting here was actually Gorsuch. In this particular instance.
Yeah, and it's like I think like I don't know where they're gonna go with this, right? But already just looking at like the last two judgments from the Roberts courts on trying to narrow down the definition of what waterways the EPA can regulate, trying to really gut the EPA's ability to regulate air quality, which again, that's something we're living through right now, guys.
Yep.
And then to top it off in 2008, basically deciding, against prosecuting Exxon for the Exxon Valdez incident, right? So to me, this I don't want to go like full bore with this because again, you want to be careful with your language, but to me, this sets a very dangerous precedent for environmental racism. It's like on the one hand to have this legal doctrine of You know what? As the United States has no legal obligation to ensure safe environmental standards for its citizens. Bad enough. But then to say that, yeah, the indigenous nations that, we've exploited and then are violating treaties with, by the way, yeah, we don't really owe them any affirmative steps when it comes to affirming basic human
I
needs.
think, maybe, I mean, obviously this does set a legal precedent, but I also think to an extent it's almost more of a clarification, right? It's like we almost certainly knew this would probably be the case, but they have, clarified to us that yes, 100% we have no intention of, protecting and as little intention as we have towards protecting the environment at all. When it comes to minorities and stuff like that, there is even less concern.
Which again, bear in mind, folks. It is the 4th of July week. My shred of American patriotism lies in the fact that we don't charge for drinking water if there's a water fountain in place. That's the one thing America does fucking right, and we're rolling that back.
Well, yeah, and I mean, to be fair,
I'm playing, but yeah.
Not on the reservation. It's not allowed.
Jesus,
they have to make their way into town.
This is just sick shit. This pisses me off.
Yeah.
But
this was definitely one of those cases, upsetting, but I think it like the next few cases are definitely where I think a lot more attention was given to, and they are also very outrageous.
Yeah, so the next one, I think these two kind of mirror each other actually. Let's start with the affirmative action decision, because
this is Students for Fair Admissions Inc. versus President and Fellows of Harvard College. So this also kind of has a pattern for the next three, where there's some dubious standing, like a legal standing for those not familiar with the concept of that. For whatever reason, we don't really talk about this in civics education, but the Supreme Court traditionally, you have to have legal standing in order to bring a case forward, right? So you have to have been wronged in some way. There has to have been damages. There has to have been harm. And this also has to be the appropriate jurisdiction for it, right? So, federal, state crime, things like that. Violations of the Constitution, obviously, or constitutional rights, obviously, all falls under sort of federal jurisprudence, and that's how a lot of stuff makes it to the Supreme Court. In this case, we have a Canadian national.
There we go.
Canadian national. Very disappointed that his 3.9 GPA and his 30 under 30 reward in Canada, which from what I understand, I don't know if I'm 100% correct on this, but I had heard that some of those rewards are more so pay to win as opposed to any actual merit to be a 30 under 30. Like 30 notable people under the age of 30. And
30 under 30 for what publication? I could do a 30 under 30 right now. I'll get my mutuals in. How about that?
There we go. But yeah, I don't know. But so he was disappointed in that. So he didn't get into his dream school of Harvard. Probably would have had to settle for Yale or something, awful like that.
Boo-hoo, I didn't get to go to the elite.
Yeah, so, his case, and he was an Asian. Asians are also kind of negatively impacted by affirmative action policies in the sense that because they have generally higher grades and whatnot, particularly when they're not from the American education system, they have those advantages in admissions. So a lot of East or West Coast schools especially would be predominantly Asian Asian Americans, Asian on visas and stuff like that. That don't intend to stay here if they wasn't for that. So he sued. The court, of course, strikes down affirmative action entirely. It had been, some places obviously have struck it down on an individual basis. Some states have, but this strikes it down nationwide. And you've kind of got your usual sort of deranged takes, I think the go-to, sort of race neutral response that people have is that, of course, this just means now the most competent people actually make it into schools, as opposed to that. And I mean, obviously, like, yeah, that's like a kind of problematic racist view to have, because the implication, right, is that you assume that anyone else is not the most competent. But I also think, like, I mean, the whole reason why, we sort of consider, we did consider race as like, something worth, and diversity as being important, right, is it's, there's certain opportunities that they might have lacked prior to college that other people would have access to that would naturally advantage them, right? And of course, this maintains sort of legacy admissions, right? I mean, that style of affirmative action is still totally fine, totally legal, and almost certainly is going to remain in particularly these Ivy League schools. And that's primarily where like affirmative action is a concern, right? Is it's primarily Ivy Leagues, maybe some higher level state schools, not so much the land grant colleges, because they kind of have like these missions to sort of promote education to people who might not traditionally have access to it, right? So like where I teach right now, Michigan State is a land grant school, so they have certain things, not necessarily affirmative action, but there's certain considerations for providing college education to people who maybe come from other backgrounds and stuff like that. Or where we went for undergraduate school, right? It's like no one's concerned about affirmative action to get into a smaller school like Oakland University or any of the other number of small schools that exist in a given state.
Right. I think you touched on all that beautifully, right? Because the thing about this the thing about our plaintiff from Students for Fair Admissions Inc., right? The guy in question, as you said, is Canadian. Did you ever hear this bit too, that he was a organizer for the youth climate strike as well as a student leader, I forget where, but for Students for Michael Bloomberg?
What? I didn't know that. Wow.
And then piggybacked off into like some conservative think tank, I believe. So again, it's like there's a whole suite of enterprising young political operatives who, because of some slight of not being upwardly mobile enough, just like work a couple campaigns, shake the right hands, and then end up working at a think tank somewhere. That is a reality, right? But then specifically this like lawsuits to end affirmative action because someone was denied denied entry to an elite school. This has been going on for like a couple years now, and like,
probably let's face it, their top choice of elite school. They probably still got into a few others.
I mean, exactly. It's like, oh, boo-hoo, you didn't get into Harvard, but you got into Yale. Like, who cares, right? And like, especially like, I find this stuff kind of trite when like, there's an increasing rate of dissatisfaction among college graduates as of late. The amount of debt people have to go into is higher, and to top it off, like, we don't have a serious conversation about how going to college isn't for everybody. It shouldn't have to be. So it's couched within all that, and then specifically like, there's this recurring meme of using Asian diaspora plaintiffs in these in these series of suits. One, because it's useful to pit minority groups against one another to create.
Yeah, and they've traditionally been used as sort of this model minority type.
Exactly, and it's also like, again, like, I can speak to this, being of the South Asian diaspora, right? Is like, very obviously you're not white, but how they treat Black and Latin people, so you consistently try to avoid that. You want to be as much of a striver as you can, so you adopt all these bourgeois affects and aspirations, and then when you don't get it, you blame the world for it, which is, again, it's like, it's the usual right-wing temper tantrum, but maybe diagnosable to a certain subset of the population in this case. And these people love falling for that, and they make ending affirmative action their whole career. There's like a whole slew of Asian uncles that love getting into it, and it's just like, I'm sorry, like, boo-hoo that you didn't get into an elite school. you probably ended up in the top school in your state anyways. You probably ended up like finding career prospects elsewhere anyhow if you were that smart. So
Sure.
again, it's pull yourself up by the bootstraps until it isn't. That shit has always been funny to me.
Yeah, and it very much it's like kind of it's like similar like to like the outrage you get out of like the idea of like trans athletes in sports and stuff
Pretty
like
much.
that, right? Where it's
Pretty
just like
much.
it's like like your mediocre child or college age child and stuff like that. They are not necessarily as gifted as you might like to think they are, and that's kind of this sort of eliminates probably the favorite excuse for not making it into their top school. In theory, I mean, there's I've seen discussion about how admission boards, if they're interested in diversity, which to the extent that they really are, I'm a little skeptical. But like they'll have to consider more class-based things and stuff like that. I'll believe that when I see it. The other thing too, the potential silver lining of this case, and I think to the extent that you believe that the silver lining will actually come to pass, I think may or may not be tied to how much of the dangerous drug copium you've been taking. But the idea that like all these Democrats who are particularly like Democratic elites who have expressed outrage over this decision, well, the way to counterbalance that would be to no longer place the same cultural precedence on Ivy League education accreditation. Like that's a big part of this, right? It's a policy that, I mean, like I'm not saying it only affects the Ivy Leagues, but that's a big part of what this impacts, right? Is the Ivy Leagues. And whatnot, and it's because there are certain venues, political venues especially, where you that is seen as the end all be all, right? Look at who's on the Supreme Court. Pretty much, I'm sure all of them are from some type of Ivy League. I don't think any of them aren't. I know, like a lot of their what are they called? Clerks. A lot of their clerks are too. I think Clarence Thomas likes to bring in some people. I think it was Thomas who likes to bring in some people who aren't from the Ivy Leagues, but still, for the most part, yeah. I mean, Princeton from Sotomayor.
I mean, yeah, they pretty much all are like from elite colleges, and it's. I am curious. Does this decision end affirmative action in all avenues like housing and employment as well, or is it just for?
Probably not.
Let me just make sure. Let me just make sure, because that could be devastating.
That could be. I mean, I just kind of figured we put a little precedence in that, anyways. I'm sure it would. I'm sure it probably sets the legal framework to pursue that if they so desire at a future date.
Yeah, so it only targets college admissions.
Yeah. Ketanji Brown Jackson was Harvard. I was like, she was the only one I wasn't sure on. Yeah, they're all like.
I mean, especially in careers like law, right? Like,
yeah,
networking and pedigree is kind of more deterministic than people make it up to be. Like, just being a smart guy who went to or value school won't get you enough.
Yeah, like exactly. And I think that's if this can sort of whittle away at that, that would be a silver lining, but I don't see it happening, right? It's just there's so much that has to be changed culturally. I mean, I'm mostly concerned with at the elite level, right? Like I don't necessarily care if like, your uncle thinks that, you're a lesser human being because you don't have an Ivy League degree, right? I mean, like, I guess, that sucks for you.
That sounds like a you and your family problem.
I mean, like, that sucks for you, right? Like, I mean, I'm sorry that you have to deal with that relationship, but like, I'm more concerned with like, okay, like, are, certain, political elites, like, are you only going to be appointed to like the Supreme Court, for instance, if you went to an Ivy League institution? Are you only going to make it, or even like, at a lesser level, right? Is someone going to consider you for like a clerkship at the Supreme Court only because you have an Ivy League degree from an Ivy League law school or something like that. And all of those things, like those are the things that I'm kind of more interested in, if that will change. And I'm skeptical, right? I'm not suggesting that this is like a sure thing that like, oh yeah, like I think this is really going to be undone. As I said, I think that like I think there's a very low chance that any of this comes to pass. But that is the only thing I can really think of as like, maybe if like, if you're really, especially like, these, Democratic leaders who are claiming that this is a really bad thing for, X, Y, and Z reason, well, then like you need to, kind of put your money where your mouth is and, consider like that there is, more to, someone's value than being, an Ivy Leaguer, right? And like, let's face it too, when it comes to like admissions into college, right? Like, I mean, I'm a college educator, so I sort of, I maybe have like a more favorable view in general of a college education from like a normative perspective, right? Financially, I mean, yeah, you're right. There's definitely problems with it, in terms of like, your actual return on investment, and we'll get into that whole debt discussion later. But I think one of the things is right is like I know several people that like even like just from people that were like in our like shared social circles, right, who were not like were far from model students in high school and early college as well, right? And like but college was sort of that big sort of turning point in their life for whatever reason, right? The social and educational experiences that you have there, that I think like like these people wouldn't have gotten a second look from some schools, but they had some they obtained value from their education that doesn't necessarily show compared to admissions, right? Ideally you're going to these places to learn something and become like a better version of you, to kind of borrow a hokey sentiment. But like I think that's stuff that like is kind of ignored in like just this pure like, oh yes, like we're bringing in just the most competent people into our school, kind of not acknowledging that like the things that you're deriving competence from aren't necessarily determinative of someone's future.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think like my thing is more of like, because I'm not, again, people rail on the academy. I'm kind of indifferent on like, oh, should you pursue a college education or not? Depends on what you want to do, right?
Sure, yeah.
But I think like specifically like there is this like it ties into our whole thing about the American dream, about what we view as success in our society, about what we deem as like the important milestones people are supposed to go through.
Well, I mean, and like, let's face it, all of that boils down to the concept of upward mobility, right?
100%, 100%.
From a metric standpoint, yes, going to college is, very strongly correlated with upward mobility in this country. And this is sort of a mark against access to that for a lot of folks.
Pretty much. So, I mean, again, just this is a classically bad decision in this lineup. One thing that I think we can open up to the discussion, I guess, right, is like I have been seeing some critiques of affirmative action as a corrective measure from the left, which is like, does affirmative action, does it affirmatively take steps to counteract discrimination and counteract, the legacies of state enforced, racism in our country, right? And the jury is still out on that. That's the thing, and that gets lost in the whole affirmative action discussion, right? Is that I don't even think we've had a period of time long enough to even assess if it was effective.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's a lot of things that have changed beyond that, right? We don't have like sort of this laboratory to sort of like really evaluate if that's been the primary driver of anything. Because obviously before that, right, you had just like wholesale discrimination at an admissions and level, at least in terms of pure education, right? I mean, obviously you had plenty of other types of discrimination, de jure or de facto discrimination in this society prior to that. But so yeah, it's kind of hard to tell, like, just the full impact on it. Obviously, I think our gut reaction is probably that it's not good. I mean, I've seen the argument that it sort of reaffirms like the racial stereotypes that like these people are inherently less competent and whatnot. I don't really buy that, because I mean they existed before affirmative action existed. It's not like that's the result of it. Yes, it sort of provides like maybe another arrow to sort of make that case if you're really like a racist scumbag, but like you'll find another reason, like one way or the other anyways.
Oh yeah. And I think like it's just one of those things that like whether or not affirmative action was effective at ending, the effects of discrimination in our country, it's one of the few legal remedies we had. You have things like, equal housing and like employment discrimination prevention like laws in some states, right? But you still have to like undergo the mechanisms to engage those before like you get a result from it. Affirmative actions is one of those things that theoretically the button has already been pressed for the process to be enacted. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where like it should institutionally be in place without you thinking about whether or not it's in place, right? So it's just like I don't know, it's like one of the few existing steps within the system to prevent discrimination being gone, or rather how to affirmatively deal with like America's past sins being erased like that. In this one avenue, it sets a bad precedent, and like again, maybe it does open up a lane for everyone else who wants to take other angles with how do you deal with one, stopping discrimination, but then two, what are other remedies to ending like the systematized legacy of discrimination? Is that reparations? Is that investment? What does that look like?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, this is stuff above my pay grade, to be honest.
Well, let's be real. I mean, like reparations, there's no doubt in my mind this court would not allow that to pass.
Absolutely. These guys, oh boy. Whew. Well, okay, so in a similar vein, right? This again, another stalking horse. Just as there was a stalking horse for ending affirmative action, this is almost like again like a callback to 2014, and like this whole resurgence of the culture war has been like a relitigation of 2014 in my mind. It feels like, do you have to bake a cake for a gay couple? Yep. Well, the court says you don't have to anymore.
Well, now they also don't have to make your website either.
Which, oh my god. Okay.
So, well, this case, right? So, like let's get to the weird issue here, right? Yes. So, 303 Creative LLC, horrible name. This is a potential website, or website designing business that someone was thinking about setting up. And she received a request from a gay couple that wasn't actually gay. It was straight. He also never filed the request to pursue this. So she sued to clarify her rights, which the Roberts Court has previously said you cannot do. But here we are, 6-3. They have affirmed the right of a business to deny services to people with whom they disagree. This is actually very similar to a lot of cases back in the civil rights era, right, where there was laws that were passed to prevent discrimination from businesses, and the court struck those down too. So this is kind of following that precedent. There's kind of problem. I mean, beyond just like the general nature of like sort of broadening this license to sort of discriminate your business against people from the LGBT stratosphere. in that general orbit, right? Not only can you deny service to them, this also kind of, if I recall the language of this, of the decision, suggests those are people are not of a protected legal status, which has, kind of opens the door for a broader number of like just any type of discrimination that you can pursue against them, legally, or, sort of just through de facto. So yeah, this is bad. No real deeper analysis than that. Then this is not good.
Earlier you were saying the LA Times wrote that there's a surprising gift for Democrats in this slew of decisions. Well, the unsurprising gifts have been for Ron DeSantis, it looks like. Because I mean, my God, who fucking cares if your customers are gay? Who fucking cares?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't really want to justify this, but like, I mean, it's like in this particular instance, like if you really, like, I get like if you're upset about like serving gay people when you're having to like design their website with like pictures of like a gay couple, like I get why that might be more upsetting, but like it's still just like, what's wrong with you at a fundamental level? Like,
I mean, what? Nobody wants to work anymore,
right?
I mean, in all seriousness, right? Like, I'm wondering about the implications of this, because let's say you do live in a state with legal protections for queer people. Like, let's say you live, I guess like Massachusetts maybe has like enshrined protections legally. This case then like creates a whole federalism debacle for you again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that those can actually be upheld.
Yeah, it sets a bad precedent. It just reopens the whole thing again, and it's like I'm trying to think like what exactly was the plaintiff's like thing here? Because by the way, I have the plaintiff's website open. It had a DDoS protection on it. Oh, we have their statement
on lawsuit.
Okay, so you can send them a message. Oh boy. Statement on lawsuit. Since filing a lawsuit to protect my First Amendment rights in 2016. Oh, fuck you. I have been bombarded with many messages about my case. Some have been supportive, but many more have been hate-filled and deeply unsettling. To all of you who sent the hateful and deeply unsettling messages, thank you. I cannot possibly respond to every person who has reached out, but I'm nevertheless compelled to say a few things.
Let's just read to those who have filled my inbox of vile, hate-filled messages.
If we disagree, we should be able to do so civilly. That is the mark of a healthy and free society. And while I think people should always strive to treat each other with politeness and consideration and speak in ways reflecting that, I will always affirm one's right to freely speak. All I am asking for is that same freedom. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, I don't. This is
and even worse. It's like I am to my clients. I'm very sorry that some people are so intolerant of my beliefs. Beliefs shared by many Jews, Muslims, Christians, and non-religious people in this country and throughout the world. Whoa! Don't throw Jews and Muslims under the bus just because
that's kind of been the go-to strategy, right? I mean, that's kind of
Judeo-Christian values.
That's sort of like the Sargon of Akkad model, right? Of like of like Islamophobia is that like, well, like the things that you don't like about my beliefs, they're even worse, right? Like that's kind of to try to like sort of turn like even people who are more liberal or something against different groups. I mean, that's kind of this is all just fucking nonsense.
So here's the thing, right? Is like this is again all put upon. It's all like nobody like was forcing her to make a website for a gay couple. Nobody. I mean, how many times like in a non-discriminatory context do you see the sign "No shirt, no shoes, no business"?
Right.
How many times do you...
To be fair, not too often. I think it's just kind of assumed.
Right. And it's like again, like graphic designers like always refuse business because of stuff like, of like a client's like own inconsistencies in like providing information and stuff.
Right.
It happens, right? So this idea that like someone would force a website designer to make a website for a gay couple at gunpoint. I mean, my God, what is this? Like, are you enacting some kind of like post-Soviet takeover?
Well,
like
also,
fantasy? Like, what is
be,
this? Like,
I mean, let's be clear too. If you were, I mean, I guess like in your case, I mean, even like to keep it kind of close to home, right? I mean, I'm sure there's people who have issues with the your relationship, right?
I don't even know if my relationship is legal at this point. I really don't know.
I mean, it is for now. But I mean, like, if you went to someone's website and were like, oh, hey, like, we want you to like design a website for our wedding, and they're like, ew, gross. Like, what would your go-to reaction be? I mean, probably not to sue them now, given that you know that, but like, you probably just be like, you know what? I'm just gonna like write a lot of nasty reviews about your services and move on.
Or even better, cool. I'll take my money somewhere else. Like,
yeah, like I mean, but you're like, I'll take my money somewhere else, and maybe I'll post like a review saying like, this person like made some really insensitive remarks to me. Screw them.
Like, what happened to the free market, folks?
Right?
It's. I think they've always been trying to do this, right? Like from 2014 onwards, we've been seeing this like repeat meme of the poor religious America-loving baker who is forced at gunpoint by the state to bake a cake for a gay wedding.
Mm-hmm.
It's just. I mean, like. It was a put upon,
well,
like,
there was,
almost fetishistic,
like, there was
thing.
that clerk, right, who like refused to like,
yeah, what's her face?
She just like refused to even like give them the certification for their wedding, which like that was a much bigger no. But they turned her into like a martyr too.
Which is like, okay, if you don't want to be the one who hands over the certificate, there's like 20 people at that office who could have done it.
Right?
I don't freaking get it. The conservative victim complex that thrives in this culture war model is
it's funny because like I've always said like, man, life would be so much easier if I was just like conservative. But then it's like, but at the same time, like, everything like it's like the end of the world. Like I was walking down the street and I saw someone in drag. Like,
bull fucking bull. Like, and that's the thing. Like all this whining about the decline of masculinity. People aren't tough anymore. You have to do things you don't like. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Like there's all this fetishism of like the hard life and like like internalizing your emotions and like doing things all that shit.
Creating fake scenarios to be upset about, like.
I mean, that's kind of what this is. Except, like, it's man,
really what this is.
This can only happen in America. Like, somebody made up a fake scenario. The defendant in this case, as it turns out, was not even gay, never even part of this motion. Where's the mysterious case here? Okay, I'm gonna share this article in the notes as well. So let's see. This week I decided to call Stewart and ask him about his inquiry. It took just a few minutes to reach him. I assumed at least some reporters over the years had contacted him about his website inquiry to 303 Creative. His contact information wasn't redacted in the filing. But my call, he said, was, quote, the first time I've ever heard of it. Yes, that was his name, phone number, email address, and website on the inquiry form. But he never sent this form. He said, and at the time it was sent, he was married to a woman. If somebody's pulled my information as some kind of supporting information or documentation, somebody's falsified that, Stewart explained. Stewart's last name is not included in the filing, so we will be referring to him by his first name in the story. I wouldn't want anybody to make me a wedding website, he continued, sounding a bit puzzled but good-natured about the whole thing. I'm married, I have a child, I'm not really sure where that came from, but somebody's using false information as Supreme Court documents. Here's what we do know, though, to be frank, I do not know what we have learned from this years-long mystery, other than it looks like Smith and her attorneys have, perhaps unwittingly, they did this intentionally,
Right.
invented a gay couple in need of a wedding website in a case in which they argue that same-sex marriages are false.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Fucking hell. It just goes to show the most American thing anyone can do is lie.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's there's a million things wrong with this. Like, this is garbage. Like, and I said, like, it creates, like, this also just opens the door. And I did see I did see an article out there that did say that the whole standing argument that has been used is actually, that's like bull crap. It doesn't matter. But of course, when I, looked at I scrolled down to read about the author, he's like the chair of like the Antonin Scalia Society. So, his view should be taken with a grain of salt.
Dear God.
But yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know how you look at this and sort of like this just broadly opens the door for the court to, like, just for any number of like Federalist Society pawns to just like bring forth ridiculous cases
on
right?
false
like,
pretenses.
On false pretenses, and the court will be like, well, it's an interesting legal question, regardless of whether or not it's based in reality. And we also share their deep concern for the fact that they might have to interact with a gay person in their life. So we, of course, had to, come out and stop it, prevent it from happening.
It's gross, and as someone said, quote, it should come as no surprise this ruling came after Pride Month ended.
Oh no, it was the last day of Pride Month.
The last day of Pride Month, sorry.
I think it was the last day, right? It was like, or it might have been the 29th. No, I think it was the 3rd. I don't know. It was 29th to 30th. I think it was the 30th. So yeah, right at the end. Get that one extra little stab in.
Yeah.
And then that takes us to the last case actually of the term.
What else we can say about that, dear God? There's really not much.
And this actually does take us to the last case of the term, which was the rejection of the Biden student loan forgiveness plan in Biden v. Nebraska. Again, this was a case where the state, obviously a few states, but obviously the Nebraska was the main filer here, sued on behalf of a loan borrower or a lender in their state. They themselves did not raise the case. It was the state that did. But the court in previous cases in this term, there's a Texas case and a few others where they said that they didn't have standing to sue on behalf of like an interstate like group or institution. Doesn't matter here. John Roberts personally had to hand down this decision using pretty much the opposite justification he used because this was using the HEROES Act, right? So this was kind of like this emergency provision to sort of forgive a certain amount of debt for students, 10 to 20,000 if you qualified, and basically, he used the opposite rationale that he used when he upheld Trump's travel ban of Muslims, where he argued that was a warranted and safe emergency to ban that. It's been so long, I barely remember the context of the Muslim travel ban.
I don't think it had good footing to begin with. I really don't remember either, but the footing was bullshit that time too. Yeah,
and of course the court upheld that. But this they couldn't uphold, right? It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm sure that, and we know this, that a lot of their billionaire best friends were against this. I'm sure it had nothing to do with that. I'm sure they independently came to these conclusions on their own, which, I mean, to be fair, maybe they did. I mean, they also are from that same, bougie status that, doesn't really care about, the common man, as it were. But yeah, I mean, this is the one that was probably, well, for me, it was the closest home in the sense that it did directly impact me. The silver lining here was that, like, and I, like, when it was struck down, I almost wasn't, like, I thought I would be a lot more mad than I was, but I was like, you know what, like, and, like, this is incredibly petty, and, like, it doesn't really make up for the fact that, like, other people would have benefited from this even more than I would have, and I would have benefited materially from this as well. Then I was like, well, at least I can say like I don't owe anything to this court. That I can just
100%.
unequivocally say that they're garbage. There's nothing redeemable about them, and yeah, like I mean that was the only like silver lining, and it's like it's a pretty minor consolation prize at the end of the day, but it's a consolation prize.
Yeah, I mean it's again like to reaffirm our earlier thesis in this episode. The branch of government that you have no say in their appointments has almost unilateral.
When we have tried to have a say, we're dismissed as irrational, fools of the masses or whatever.
Pretty much, and like we have a later discussion on like what to do about the court, and I think some of the Federalist Papers would clarify that is indeed how we are to be viewed. Anyways, the thing in this, right, is that the Biden administration's plan on student debt was already like preemptively compromised. It was preemptively limited. It was prone to a degree of means testing. And frankly, to be perfectly honest, in our current economic conditions, shedding a little bit of debt would stimulate consumption. It would stimulate first-time home ownership. All the stuff that you want to happen in an American economy, and if you want your young population to feel like they can hit certain cultural milestones, right? So I can definitely say I had no positive expectations of this going in. I'm not even going to take the joy in feeling vindicated that it got shut down, because again, it's just like they kind of just took this one lying down. And there's still stuff he could do as the president to maybe wipe off certain degrees of debt.
And he did very quickly make an announcement about that. It's not entirely clear to me what they're doing. I believe, from my rough understanding of it, is I think it kind of requires them doing it on a like individual basis. And there's like ways to like sort of extend the student loan pause, but like not in as exhausting of a way as before. Yeah. So like, I mean, I am impressed by the administration in its expediency on like at least trying to do something so far. We'll see, what form that ultimately takes. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, this was probably not a real mystery. The only reason I had like any doubt in my mind that they would maybe do the right thing, or like any belief that they might do the right thing, was kind of just rooted in the idea that some of the other cases they had decided this term had made that, which were built on similar standing claims as this one. That because those were tossed aside, I thought there was a good chance this one would be as well. But of course, there's some things they just can't let lie, and their contempt for young people was not one of those things that they were going to pass on.
Or for certain, and also like while we're at it, I think we have to consider one. Just as we've talked about corruption and corporate incentives and how Congress operates, and even to extent how the court operates, right? I mean, financial services is a major, debt collection is a major fucking headache for everybody, but the companies that collect debt are still in business, Yeah. It is a massively profitable business to be a student loan servicer, it seems. It is a massive, and like, this pause has affected their short-term profits and their long-term. I mean, I don't know if it really affects them in the long term, because you have to make the payments allegedly. So you'll get your money when you get your money is how people have tried to talk about emergency payments back in the early days of the pandemic, and that went nowhere. But to say it, it's like, I think there is definitely a confluence of interests in maintaining the present order on student loan debt and student loan payments. I think, I this is just like something I should probably read into, but I'm pretty sure if you look into like the campaign finance activities of student, loan services, they probably donate to candidates who have a vested interest in preventing student loan forgiveness, who have a vested interest in preventing any form of relief, right? So, maybe this is like a 2-1, two birds with one stone approach, right? Is like even procuring additional funding for public schools is probably something they're against. Hell, if you had more funds for schools, like you would have ways to correct problems without relying on affirmative action as well. That's a hypothetical we have, right? So it's incredibly disappointing to see this. I can't say I'm surprised, but what I can say is that getting some degree of student loan forgiveness passed would secure the youth vote for Biden in his next term. It would secure something for the Democrats in coming election cycles. And to have put their chips in on all this, and have reaped nothing for it yet, that's a major bag fumble for the Biden administration. That is not a tactically sound move they made here.
Right, and I think to some extent, right. I mean, the court's probably aware of this, and like, I mean, that it's politically incentivized to try to whatever they can to sort of make sure that he loses, right?
Yep.
And I mean, that's just kind of the nature of this, and like that's a problem with the status of particularly our Supreme Court as a political institution. Other countries, and that kind of gets into like our discussion for like reforms, right? But other countries do not have these problems with their Supreme Courts. And the reason for that is that like ours is like kind of uniquely more powerful. So, like what do we do about the court just kind of in general, right? I mean, there's the kind of probably apocryphal quote from Andrew Jackson about, the Chief Justice has made his decision, I'll let him enforce it. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's particularly likely. It's probably kind of dangerous to do anyways. Obviously that quote is sort of, it's in context, it's about, maintaining the trail of tears. I mean, that's, historically not a good thing.
Not the example you want to cite, but even then it's like, would another executive take that mindset for something good? Biden for sure doesn't plan to.
Right. Yeah. Improving ethical standards. We kind of talked about this before. I think really that's just a way to like stop the gravy train, right? I think it's just a way to make their lives maybe a little less enjoyable. And I'm in favor of that, but I don't think it's really a solution to anything. I would prefer that their lives actually became much more miserable, to be honest. There's things that Congress could do, like they could, not pay for like the air conditioning bill and stuff like that. Just, kind of really petty stuff. That's not going to really get very far, but it's stuff that like I'm in favor of doing just to like make their lives worse. Biden's already come out against expanding the court, and I at this point I think expanding the court of not only is it like sort of like I think unlikely. And not that I necessarily agree with like Biden's like take that like it's just going to politicize the court further, but like it's not really a long-term solution.
No, it's not. It's not. I mean, like again, FDR. I think FDR is the one who started court packing, right? Or was that a little bit earlier?
Well, technically, I mean, we've increased the size of the court even before then, but that was when like the term was used as like this mainly political context where it was primarily from the perspective of like he is trying to, his Supreme Court was also, very destructive in terms of striking down parts of the New Deal, large parts of it in a lot of cases, and whatnot. And that's kind of why they, like he wanted to go after them and sort of replace them. The solution for that, and kind of the solution for like what kind of killed a lot of these like court reforms in the past is just the court starting to do the things that you want it to do. So that kind of can always like suck the winds out of the sails. I mean, maybe that's a short-term wise if like the court sort of responds to threats by like acquiescing. I mean, that's not the end of the world. But the other thing that I think is that probably, and it's a little harder to do, is like we really need to chip away at judicial review. Wasn't there at the beginning. The Federalist Papers don't talk about it. It was created by
accident, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, it was created by John Marshall well after the court was founded, and it was, an earlier decision in Marbury versus Madison, but still, like, it had been around for several years at that point. And there's a few ways to do it, right? Like, Article 3 of the Constitution gives Congress like broad powers to sort of determine jurisdiction of courts. They can sort of chip away jurisdiction over different types of things. That's probably a more long-handed approach to it. But judicial review, particularly over like political things, is the main difference that the U.S. Supreme Court has over other Supreme Courts, right? They don't have a lot of other courts don't have judicial review over things that were done by the legislative or executive branches. And I think that's really like the long-term solution. I don't necessarily know how practical or close we are to achieving it, but I think it's really the only thing that can be done at this point is to defang this institution as much as possible, because like we're not going to get like great decisions from them ever again, most likely, right? Like and like doing stuff to like improve like or create more liberal outcomes in the short term, I think is short-sighted, and the court just needs to go. It's kind of just antithetical to a democratic society anyways. There's just very little reason to maintain its current apparatus in the system.
I think that's spot on, and I think like what I was trying to hint at earlier when we were on our previous section was my joke for what is the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers is the sales brochure for the Constitution.
Yeah, and
rather than it really being a sales brochure, it's pretty much like, I mean, Hamilton is going mask off in this document. He's really telling you what he thinks. Sure. And I know, again, like I think maybe Lin-Manuel Miranda really downplayed how much we should look at this guy by making this goofy ass musical about him, because particularly like the financial sector, you can see him as the founder of it. You can also see him as like this kind of patriarchal figure for the northern elite, right? Whereas Jefferson represents the South in that history. And
I mean, to an extent, to a lot of like our like inflections on the founders, I think particularly post like Lin-Manuel Miranda and whatnot, on Hamilton is kind of like it has focused more on that regional divide, when like someone like Jefferson is like deeply complicated by today's standards, like where it's like, yes, he was a slave owner and maintained that institution, but at the same time he also somehow had like the most democratic ideals of any of the founders.
Which again, like his ideals were also pretty dog shit. So imagine what that means for the rest of the
sure,
room, right?
Yeah, like it's
exactly. No, but I mean, I think that's exactly it. Because if you look at like Hamilton's ideas for what he wanted the government to look like, again, like the idea for a Senate that is appointed by state legislatures, it isn't directly elected. This idea for a court that is also not democratically elected, and in fact, like I forget which Federalist paper he cites this in, but he's pretty much like, yeah, no shit, don't you want something that could like stabilize governance in case the other two get a little too radical?
Well, and I think that's always been the defense of the court, but I think the problem is it's like, I mean, one, it's in this case it's kind of been captured by like the radical elements.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah.
and kind of beyond that, right? I mean, it's kind of, I mean, one, I mean, obviously, like, yeah, I'm not necessarily in favor of maintaining the like structural elitism of the Constitution, anyways. But like I mean, like the kind of stuff they're talking about, like the masses, is like, I mean, they also just envisioned the court as like way weaker than it is now, right? Like, they didn't envision judicial review existing to the extent that it does. They didn't envision. I mean, like he refers to it as the least dangerous branch in the Federalist Papers. which is probably not the way a lot of Americans feel about it today. And like, I mean, not to say that like, the other, because I think like the idea that you have some motion of control over the other branches sort of mitigates like long-term concerns that people have over them. And like, there are some that are worth having over Congress and the presidency. But I think just the idea, or maybe in some cases the illusion of input and control sort of mitigates that. But I mean, like, heck, when I ask my class, like, how would you like deal with, like what can you do about a justice that you don't agree with, and like the Supreme Court, if they continue to not agree with them, and like increasingly more people, I'm not saying that they're advocating this or threatening to do it, but when they're like, oh well, the only recourse you really have is to like kill them, right? Like, that's like a complete erosion of legitimacy, which is like the whole thing that they're sort of is like their bread and butter, right? And John Roberts, anytime someone questions the legitimacy of the court, gets his panties up in a bunch. I think his recent quote was like something like, people need to stop criticizing decisions they don't agree with. It's like, well, why would I criticize the ones I do agree with?
And what's the point of freedom of speech?
I mean, yeah, like, like, what's the point of, like, you have free speech if you want to, like, whip out, like, the N-word or, the F-word in public, the slur, not the, F-bomb. But, but, like, God forbid you say something negative about the Supreme Court. That's a no.
That's a bridge too far. That's a bridge too far for these people. I don't know. Like, the thing is like, what is the solution? To me, it always goes back to, like, the assumptions that went into the founding of America are traditionally bourgeois ones. Mm-hmm. I think, Americans have this mythology almost that, like, freedom and democracy are the founding principles, as opposed to what I see them as, which is like, the freedom to kind of make profit and not have to kick up to the royalty, I think was the real founding, basis. But all that being said, right, is like, if you want a society that values democratic ideals and personal freedoms, you have to rewrite the system.
Yeah,
you got to. I mean, what is it?
Trappings of it can remain intact, but there's deep components of it that are incompatible with that.
Pretty much. I would say, like, the country that people claim to live in versus what it is today they do not sync up. They do not exist in tandem. And I don't know what's the procedure to invoke a constitutional convention.
Admittedly, I don't know. I think
I don't think there is one. I think they gave up on that.
You just kind of do it. I mean, there's a procedure to like make amendments and whatnot, and I mean, then there's always that approach, I guess, to overhauling the court as well. Clarify its lack of access, judicial review through an amendment. That might be an option too. Might be the more exhaustive option. Because I mean, I think like there's still like maybe hints in the public of people like kind of thinking like, well, like they might stop something really bad from going through, but like I just don't see it, right? I mean, none of the excesses of the Trump administration were really checked by this court, and that court was slightly more liberal than what it is today. Like,
right,
they're not going to like there's no excesses that are going to necessarily be checked by that. The only excesses are, it's like, kind of a drop in the bucket financial expenditure to, help people like not have to pay for student loans or as much of their student loans. And I mean, that's just kind of it. Like, it's like this, I don't think you're going to get anything desirable from maintaining this institution in its current structure.
It almost begs the question, like, what is it when people talk about stability that they think this institution offers? Because I think the one consensus that there is, if there is anything today, is that things are not good.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, across the aisle, I don't think there's a single person you can go up to on the street and say, like, hey, do you love the status quo in this country? And they'll be like, yeah. Like no one, pretty
Who
much.
who is saying that exactly, right? So
Like from and like obviously like there's vast disagreements on like what is wrong with the status quo and what needs to be changed and what elements of it need to be changed, etc. But like no one is like I know very few people who are pro status quo other than maybe at like one particular given moment because they're not thinking about the stuff that really irritates them.
exactly, and it just begs the question, right? Where it's like there is more and more of a societal impetus and almost like a mandate for progressive change from any branch, from any direction, not necessarily towards the right. I mean, like, just anything that puts a little more money in someone's pocket, anything that makes things a little less shitty, anything that would make things a bit easier to breathe, quite literally and figuratively for people. It's what everyone wants, and yet the system as currently constituted cannot even deliver on that. And it insists it must defend the status quo. I don't even think the people that benefit from the status quo would say they're having a great time. Not that I care about the feelings of the 1%.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, because like there's always something that there's those pesky handful of regulations that are still enforced are always always on their fantasy chopping block. So yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's about all I have to say about reform. I don't know if we have. Do you want to go through this little extra reading I put in?
I got time. Let's.
All right, yeah. So I looked this up because like I think this court kind of like it sort of gets this historical pass because it's like, well, like you had in the past the Supreme Court made decisions like Dred Scott and whatnot, and I'm like, to me, there's little question in my mind that if the same legal questions that were up on some of these, so this is an article titled "The 13 Worst Supreme Court Decisions of All Time," some of which were actually by the Roberts Court, by the way. Spoiler alert. But I was like, I feel like, this court, maybe the ratios would be different, but I think it would make very similar decisions in a lot of these.
Yeah,
let's go down the list. So number one, they've got Dred Scott versus Sanford. Obviously, this is a slavery protection measure, infamous. Most people know it and recognize it. The only reason that like it wouldn't happen today is we don't have that kind of slavery anymore. The prison slavery, kind of, but that's a little different. Buck v. Bell, a little less known one. This one's actually still on the books. But which is funny because when you pair it with Dobbs, which is like you do not have the right to choose, Buck v. Bell actually gives the government the capacity to both state and federal. I think this was a state issue that they can sterilize you forcefully.
Yeah, so the court upheld the forced sterilization of those with intellectual disabilities. But I don't. Did it even like set standards for what those are?
I doubt it. I mean, like the 1927, they were probably even less scientifically adept than they are today.
Yeah, only one dissented.
Mr. Justice Butler. Kind of an unfortunate name.
Yeah, I'm just looking through the decision here. It does not give let's see. Yeah, if the inmate is a minor, notice is also to be given to their parents.
But some of the quotes from this decision are pretty incredible, like where it's like 3 generations of imbeciles is more than enough for society.
Jesus.
Like, yeah, I mean, like this is like peak, bourgeois elitism and whatnot.
And this is 1927 too, so like we don't even have the same framework for mental illness that we do now, right?
Right, yeah.
We didn't even have treatment in the same ways that we did. My God.
Yeah.
Oh God. Okay. It's only going to get worse from here. So next up, we got Korematsu versus United States. Dear God.
This is one that upheld internment. This one, some court scholars argue this was turned down in the Muslim ban decision, which the dissent directly compared to Korematsu. And that's because Roberts has like this kind of throwaway line of like, of course this court would not, uphold this decision like Korematsu. This is totally different. But yeah, I mean, again, like if a Republican president tried to do this today, I'm skeptical this court would really choose to not just side with him or even just pass on the question entirely.
It's that unique brand of American historiography, right? Where like, well, all the bad stuff happened in the past. We won't do it today.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay, next up, Plessy versus Ferguson. The doctrine of separate but equal to uphold segregation.
Yep. Another one that a lot of people kind of know about. Again, I think if similar legal questions were here, you have another one. Number 5 is the civil rights cases, which is this one. So this law sought to ban racial discrimination in business and public accommodations in an 8-1 decision. Very similar to 303 Creative. Right, it's a different group, but this is basically the same thing, right? I said I think in that decision they do kind of argue that they do not see like sexual preferences as like a protected social identity. So and that opens the door for more stuff like this, maybe even a separate but equal standard for that group. Bowers versus Hardwick. This was actually shockingly recent.
1986, yeah.
Which upheld a sodomy statute, criminalizing sexual activity there. This has been overruled in 2003, but again, I mean, I think is that 2003 one super precedent in the words of certain justices? Probably not. Lochner versus New York.
One thing about Bowers versus Hardwick. This is noted in the article. As Justice Harry Blackmun noted in his dissent, the majority opinion displayed an almost obsessive focus on homosexual activity.
Yeah, Blackmun's got a lot of good things in a lot of his decisions and dissents.
I guess there is legal precedent for. Damn, you care a little too much about gay sex, huh?
Yeah, there it is. Locker versus New York. This is just like a blatantly pro-capital one, right? So in this case, New York had a law limiting bakery work hours to 10 hours a day, and they argue that they couldn't do that. That it violates a liberty of contract and the due process clause.
See, liberty of contract always makes me laugh in employment stuff because like. They talk about employment like, okay, you're selling your labor to whoever will buy it. The sale of labor is not really something you do entirely, consensually. It's
right.
Something you have to do to survive.
Yeah, it's really more so like especially like for like certain things, right? I mean, like there's a lot of issues of just mobility in this country for a lot of reasons, right? From like one job to another, like healthcare and other things like that you
right.
need. And like, yeah, I mean, stuff like this is just, liberty contract. It's not so much that you sell your labor as much as it gets purchased.
Pretty much.
Let's put it that way.
Also, again, this case is from 1905. So for bakery work hours, right? This isn't just your this isn't like your little like, neighborhood like bake shop. You're not getting a muffin here. This is probably like industrial bread baking. They're probably, working with industrial quantities of flour, which again, that's a breathing risk. Mm-hmm. You're working with your hands. So imagine, if you will, not only operating machinery if it existed in the time, but also to knead and work with like tons of dough every day.
Yeah, I mean, this was a very anti-labor era in terms of a lot that was being done or not done at the government level. I think we're largely past that, but I mean, I have little doubt that we've seen the whittling away of a lot of, government protections and stuff like that. I'm not confident that, again, that this is like the type of thing that you would be able to, that the court would like kind of do the right thing for.
Definitely.
We then had Hammer versus Dagenhart, 1918. They ruled that Congress could not ban child labor in interstate commerce. This feels like this is something that, like,
This feels very recent.
we will 100% have a similar case come up in, like, the next few years.
And
Like,
they
I
will
would be
uphold it
shocked.
using this. They will use Hammer versus Dagenhart as like a precedent.
Yeah, because, like, I mean, I don't know if this has ever been overturned. I mean, they don't outline that in the article, if it has been. But, like, as I said, with all the child labor stuff that's happening, 100% this is going to come up again as a legal question.
My God.
Kello versus City of New London. So this one's weird. Basically, what happened was, like, it's kind of like an eminent domain case where they took from one private party and gave it to another, and they said that's okay. When I looked at this decision, it was actually the liberals that had made this decision. I think that was probably kind of a case of upholding, like, the tenets of eminent domain. It's just that, like, the facts of this case are, you know, kind of shitty.
Yeah, the decision allowed New London to condemn Suzette Kilo's land and transfer it to a private developer as part of a comprehensive redevelopment plan. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look good, and especially it just sets a bad precedent for, you know, what we now see with, like, both urban blight and gentrification. It's not good. Yeah,
It's like, it's the kind of thing where it's, like, kind of problematic for the court to do stuff with, because, like, the legal precedents they could set could kind of, like, set back, like, the entirety of stuff like eminent domain, even for good purposes. So, you know, there's kind of a mixed thing there. But yeah, I think the individual facts and, like, the circumstances that, you know, this sort of opens the door for are definitely bad.
Yeah, and this is pretty recent.
Yeah,
This is
I think it's the Rehnquist court, end of Rehnquist.
Oh boy.
We then had Lucas v. South Carolina Coastal Commission, 1992. This one, again, is very much like kind of like this pro capital one, right? In this case, you had someone, Lucas, buy this kind of beach property for building homes, and South Carolina said that he couldn't do that because to prevent coastal erosion. But the Supreme Court argued that this was a total destruction of, quote, all economically viable use of the property. So they this is kind of a very anti-environmental one, right? Like, this kind of prevents this probably sets a lot of precedents to sort of prevent government agencies from, you know, kind of protecting land for environmental reasons.
Well, this also just is probably legal cover that the Florida developers that, like, have you seen, like, those apartment complexes that are just so close to the coast that they just get flooded?
Or even, like, the ones that relatively recent structure that collapsed too, right?
Right. It's like, well, here you go. This is the statute they're building it under. It's like, well, the Coastal Commission was basically warning you if you think about it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, beach erosion. It's they're you know, yeah, they do need to preserve the substrate from getting eroded, but if they have to do that, makes you wonder if anything's structurally sound if you build it there, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, next up they go with the big one here, Bush v. Gore. Bush v. Gore. Or as we can call it, January 6th Chronicles.
Yeah, pretty much. So obviously this again, the court directly intervened to halt the recount in Florida. O'Connor's regrets this ruling, and that's largely because she wasn't happy that Alito replaced her when she retired under Bush. So, you know, kind of a little self-centered, poor foresight on her part.
That's yeah. It's just in a literal partisan split. So I never want to hear again that the conservative justices don't act ideologically. I never want to hear that again.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Next up, again, Exxon Shipping versus
The last two are both Roberts Court decisions.
Both again, if not the first salvo, probably, like, you know, the Roberts Court going full mask off. Following the Exxon Valdez spill, one of the greatest environmental disasters of all time, and after years of litigation, Exxon was finally held responsible for its negligent captain and hit with $5 billion in damages. Then the court ruled that Exxon couldn't be subject to punitive damages in excess of compensatory ones, dropping total damages down to $500 million. Not only did Exxon evade billions in damages, the Supreme Court's ruling increased the value of its stock by $23 billion in 2 days. I remember being pissed off by this as a kid, and every adult in my life telling me to shut the fuck up.
Jay-Z. I mean, this look. I mean, in hindsight, I don't really remember it being covered nearly on that level, right? I mean, I remember the talk about like the retribution for Exxon. It's hard to believe that was in 2008.
I just remember something like the Exxon CEO was like, "I just want to go home. I'm tired of this shit," and it's like, "Fuck you, man!" Like, happened on your watch.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh God. Last one. This is Citizens United versus FEC. I think you have to quote McCutcheon versus FEC at the same time, but you know.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some earlier ones too that came up, but yeah, this is the big one where it's sort of money is speech. You obviously have like the other decision that's sort of the idea that basically corporations are people and they therefore have free speech rights. And all that, right? So yeah, I mean, this is kind of like this is probably the big legacy of the Roberts Court, right? It's kind of tearing away at pretty much every form of electoral stuff, right? I mean, it's any type of electoral protections, right? Whether it be financial regulation, whether it be I mean, even like civil rights legislation, right? I mean, obviously Roberts himself wrote the decision sort of striking down like parts of like, the Civil Rights, Voting Rights Act stuff and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, it's an anti-democratic institution deliberately whittling down the pretenses of democracy in this country.
Pretty much. And then at every major juncture where some historical injustice could have, I said historical, get me out of here. Where some major injustice could be, corrected.
Mm-hmm.
They just fumble the bag on it, and it's not accidental. It's not, it's not like they're sitting there with their hands tied behind their back like, well, we wish we could help. We just can't.
Yeah.
Acting probably the most intentionally maliciously, although Congress gives them a run for their money.
Right. I mean, at least, there's a little bit more recourse, but you're right that, it's there's bad actors across the board in our government.
Yeah, but I think for sure like that image of the wizened Supreme Court justice who weighs all matters with supreme importance and takes, great pains to do what is right. That is a fiction that people are somehow still falling for. And if that's you, well, buddy, get ready to learn Chinese.
Well, and also, like, I mean, like some of these things too, right? I mean, like how radical is like the idea of like just monitoring finances and elections and whatnot, right? This is designed, like it's not like they're tempering, the reckless impulses of the masses anymore, right? These are just like a lot of these decisions have like, just pure ideological bases, right? To like reject them, right? Like this helps our side, this doesn't. Let's make decisions based on that, right? Yes, obviously there are many decisions. There's many decisions this particular cycle, right, that were probably relatively non-controversial. There's things that they might be more strategic on, where they're like, well, maybe let's not go too far here. But overall, I mean, we're at 2 terms of this 6-3 split already, and they've done a ton of damage.
Yeah, they not even a moment of respite was given to us from the last term, and you think, well, it's only once in the summer, but again, it's like these are unilaterally sweeping decisions these guys get to make. I'm running out of ways to say the same point differently, but it's just it's crazy that we have a system where 9 people have complete and unilateral decision on how something's going to go. And we had the fig leaf of neutrality acting as a check in that process.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it.
Any other country, people will be up in arms about it. We would already have boots on the ground.
And look at France. France is like tearing itself apart for, kind of a relatively mild adjustment to their Social Security compared to like what we've seen a lot of Republican primary candidates advocate for.
Dear God, God bless the French. At least they've taken those democratic rights to some to some use. Whereas here, I think I don't know. Just I'm not saying that like revolution is like the immediate response people should take. How do you even go about that when no one's organized? Second, don't talk about that on the internet. That's how you get
Yeah, I mean, like calling for like revolution in a literal sense, right? Not in the sense that like like when a Bernie Sanders talks about it, right? That he means like this sort of, relatively mild case, right? A bloodless revolution that is kind of, more of a legalistic change over the process. But I always felt like, like calls for revolution, it gets a little bit too much into like it's always armchair socialism sort of stratosphere, right? And it's not practical. It doesn't really address the issues that are kind of occurring in real time, right? And I as I said, I mean, like a lot of the remedies for this, gutting the court and stuff like that, those are things that are going to take time, and it's unfortunate that we're going to have like another year of this minimum. And probably many years of this without like any real substantial changes, especially if there's not like a public outcry to like really do something about the court, right? Because we've seen sort of recommendations about changing the court sort of just kind of go in one ear out the other with the establishment.
Pretty much. Once again, I am out of prescriptions on what to do. Like, especially like with the subject matter we've covered today, like this is definitely stuff that's out of everyone's hands. But I think what I stay true to, as always, is dispense with the fiction that this is a fair or functioning system. Dispense with the notion that it's rationally ordered. And especially dispense with the notion that this institution of the Supreme Court has earned or maintained any legitimacy. It hasn't.
Yeah.
Aside from that, I don't know. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where we're at, right? There are a lot of unknowns. Plenty of reasons to be frustrated, but being frustrated, isn't always the most constructive instrument.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's like this is only a single event in a long story.
Yeah.
This is not exactly a. I mean, it sucks. It's worse than it was last time, but this is not like the start of something new. This is unfortunately the present stage of what has been a very shitty process in the making.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's really all I got. I want to shout out Josh for coming up with the outline for this episode and front loading some of the research for this one.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, it was relatively, when you're following it, almost all of it in real time, it does make it a little easier. Yeah, I mean, always happy to do the extra work for the show if need be.
We are lucky to have you as always. And it's just, again, this is like this has been a classic highlight of my summers of just this first week of July, just being like a shit deluge of stupid decisions from the Supreme Court. But You know, when you're subscribed to Greenhouse Gaslighting, you don't have to go through it alone.
Yeah, there's the bright side. That's the optimistic note we'll leave you off on with.
Exactly. Anything else you want to plug, Josh? Or any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of it for today. It's always fun to do this, and I said, leave us off on the happy note that you're not alone out there. If you're, suffering, frustrated, always, we provide. I kind of hate the term safe space because it is a little, feels a little, juvenile at times. But we always provide a safe space to, air your grievances, as long as you agree with us. If not, you can go fuck yourself.
Yep. Stand by that. Josh is also part of a show called MonsterPop. They cover pro wrestling and other topics. It's a great show. Highly recommend you guys to check it out. I'll have the links to MonsterPop in our show notes, as well as all the links to our social media, as well as the articles that Josh covered in the outline today. I will have links to those as well in the show notes. So before we cut out, I will say we don't know what the status of Twitter is in the foreseeable future. But for the time being, stick to Twitter for updates. If something changes by the time this episode has been uploaded, we're going to play this by ear. There's really nothing else we can do.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming through, Josh, and thanks again for tuning in, dear listener. Take care.